Hi there. Today we are going to touch on auction properties and what are auction properties and what are the steps to trying to acquire an auction property. So to begin with, auction properties are marketed across the internet on all different types of websites. There are specific auction websites, there are specific real estate websites, and they're everywhere. So how do you know if they're legitimate and how to pursue them? There is no special equation and there is no exact science to this because there are lots of different types of auction properties. So you can have courthouse, for example, properties that are auctioned right at the courthouse steps. It will say on the website the location of the auction. So you have internet-based auctions and you have in-person-based auctions, physically based auctions. And the two, like I said, are going to show up on whatever website they're marketed as. If it's a legitimate website, it'll show where the auction is going to be, whether it's a website or in person. So a lot of times, like I said, there will be auctions on county courthouse steps and it will give the date and location. You could also get that information from public records and you could go to the courthouse for those records. So that's one way of having an auction. The different requirements to pursue that property at the auction will be posted in the public records as well. If there is a deposit requirement, how they would like you to pay, the timeline for closing, all of that will be covered in those public documents at the courthouse. So it's important to know that if the auction is happening on the courthouse steps, that you pursue those public records from the courthouse so that you know exactly how to come prepared at that date and time. So that's one way of having an auction. Another way is having a private auction that's in person. And that can be done by a local company. It can be done by a company that's out of area and they come in and do local auctions for groups of companies and groups of individuals. So it can be a private company. Those are trickier to find because usually they're only marketed on their specific website. So it'll take a little bit of digging to find the company and which website it is, and then which areas they cover because they're private. That is another way of having an auction is a private company, a private auctioneer would come in. A lot of times it's word of mouth advertising. And like I said, their website is really the big driver. So that's another way. A third way is through the internet. So there are websites such as auction.com. There's websites such as Hubzoo and different outlets like that, different websites like that, that have auction-based bidding for houses. And a lot of times you can do it independently, but you can also make sure you go through your realtor because although you don't have to and you have both options, a lot of times it's easier to go through the realtor who already has a profile set up with that website. There are different requirements such as deposits and whatnot that they'll often require of a buyer that they may not require of an agent. So there are different specifications that you might meet or not meet, but you can use those websites to bid on properties. Now, a big disclaimer and disclosure to be aware of is that you need to make sure that with these auction properties, you look into what expenses are being covered and what aren't. What taxes are being covered and what aren't. If there are back taxes owed and closing costs such as your abstract and your survey, what is the bank or what is the current owner going to cover that you might or might not have to cover? So if they say, well, there are back taxes and the buyer is responsible for paying for that, that could be a huge sum that you're not ready to pay for. That is not a traditional expense that you would have as a buyer, but in an auction situation, you might have to incur that. So it's important that you understand what expenses are being covered and what aren't. If there are back taxes owed, if there's any type of lien on the property, that is the most important piece. To understand if there's any type of lien on the property that needs to be paid off before the property can be transferred into your name. The worst thing that could possibly happen is that you start down this process and you learn that there's tens of thousands of dollars owed from XYZ company or XYZ taxes, and it's just important you know that up front before you submit your bid. So we always recommend that we go through the property before placing the bid, really take a thorough look, especially if it's a distressed property or if it's been abandoned or neglected for a long time, but it's not always an option, and it's important to know that that's a large risk you're taking when that is the situation. So Like I said, there are different avenues for bidding. There are different avenues and websites and ways to do auctions. And really, that's a general overview of it. But every different avenue is so specific, whether it's in person, the county, courthouse, a private company, or an online service that's doing it. Every website, every company is going to be different. But those are big factors to consider when you're going through it. One, the condition of the property. Two, if there are any type of back taxes or liens owed on the property. Three, the expenses that are being covered by the seller of the property. And four, having representation and making sure that you have somebody covering you to make sure that as you're going through the process, all of these factors are accounted for and that you know what you're getting into. So if there's anything we can do to help when it comes to an auction property, please don't hesitate to reach out. Like I said, it's very different from place to place and from company to company. So even if you found a property and it isn't any of the websites we talked about, if you want to reach out and ask us about it, let us know.